Gentlemen, we can rebuild him. We have the technology. We have the capability to make the world's first bionic man.
Goranger has its place in history. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a great show for its time, but it's aged pretty poorly and just doesn't hold up to modern scrutiny. JAKQ, however, is a much more complicated season. Right when you start watching JAKQ Dengekitai, it's clear that this is the black sheep of the franchise. It starts with 4 central members of the team instead of 5, its title doesn't include the word Sentai, and the transformation sequence is a lot more complicated. It would be easy to accuse JAKQ of eschewing the series' traditions, but remember, Goranger was the only season that had aired so far, and the franchise had no real traditions yet. Still, even when compared to Goranger, JAKQ is a rather major shift. But I'm getting ahead of myself. JAKQ starts with the world being terrorized by a criminal syndicate, Crime, who apparently, despite their acumen for illegal activity, clearly never learned the value of discretion. What's next? An assassin's guild called Murder? Anyway, their reach and influence is so significant that in order to fight them, Interpol creates a task force named ISIS, which means JAKQ joins Archer in the really unfortunate organization names in retrospect Hall of Fame.
Greetings, I'm Dr. Krieger. Allow me to be the first to welcome you to the ISIS family.
Commander Kujirai, the head of operations for ISIS in Japan, scouts possible candidates for JAKQ, a cybernetics program to convert humans into a team of cyborgs to fight crime's powerful lieutenants, who are themselves mechanical monsters. To this end, Kujirai finds 4 individuals suitable for the process. Goro Sakurai, who becomes Spade Ace, Ryu Higashi, who becomes Dia Jack, Karen Mizuki, who becomes Heart Queen, and Bunta Daichi, who becomes Clover King. Each of them has control over a different fundamental force of the universe: weak and strong atomic forces, electromagnetism, and gravity. Goro is the leader of the team. He's a pentathlon athlete, an Olympic gold medalist, and a champion in karate, archery, and judo, while also being a skilled equestrian. Initially, he rejects Kujirai's invitation because he wants to continue training for the next Olympics, but after saving Karen from a car crash caused by crime, he changes his mind and undergoes the augmentation procedure. This gives him control over atomic power, which means he has access to 2 of the 4 fundamental forces, making him the strongest character of the original JAKQ team. While this theoretically means that he should basically be Dr. Manhattan, in practice all it means is that he can see through walls and enhance his senses and abilities far beyond normal human limits. As Spade Ace, he wields the Spade Arts, a whip that turns into a bow, the arrows of which are far stronger and have more penetration power than any bullet thanks to his using them in combination with his atomic powers. Ryu is a welterweight boxing champion who was framed for murder by boxing promoters in Las Vegas because he wouldn't rig a championship fight. He was extradited to Japan to face prosecution when Kujirai gave him an offer. He could either stand trial and be found guilty for a crime he didn't commit, or be granted amnesty and drafted into JAKQ. Though he's leery of the deal, he eventually acquiesces. Ryu is a rough-and-tumble loner, though he takes to being a member of JAKQ quite well. He has control over 1/2 of the electromagnetism powers, that being electricity, which makes him a human battery. He's outfitted with a hidden knife and laser, and can also somehow use his powers to cheat at poker. He can also use his power to charge appliances and vehicles in a pinch, though this drains his energy significantly. As Dia Jack, he uses the Dia sword, which is capable of cutting through anything. Karen is a skilled policewoman who is investigating illegal drug smuggling operations in Japan. She found that Crime was responsible for most of the trafficking, and while celebrating her father's retirement, Crime ran her car off the road to silence her. The crash killed Karen's father and caused her to lose her right arm. After being saved by Goro, Karen joins JAKQ to take revenge for her father. She controls the other half of electromagnetism, and her magnetic powers let her snatch bullets out of the air by attracting them with her hand. Her powers also make her a human radar, which lets her track down things and people very efficiently. As Heart Queen, she wields the Heart Q, a dagger in the shape of a Q that she focuses her magnetic energies through to confuse and throw around enemies. Bunta is an oceanographer who was in a freak submarine accident and died from oxygen deprivation, but was revived by JAKQ's cyborg enhancements. which is an affront to medical science. How did they heal his brain? Did they just shove a computer in his skull to replace whatever didn't work anymore? Anyway, Bunta's entire family, including his 2 parents and younger sister, died in a plane crash prior to the start of the story. As a result, he has a soft spot for children, especially if they remind him of his late sister. Bunta has control over gravity, which in the context of the show means that he has super strength and can change his density to crush his enemies. As Clover King, he wields the Club Megatongue, a ball and chain he uses to club enemies or create tremors. Their commander is Kujirai, who takes the codename Joker, and he sports a ridiculous-looking yellow uniform as an unofficial Yellow Ranger. He's also the namesake of the team's name and the one to give them orders. He has some agents working for him, but for the most part he relies on JAKQ to get things done. Crime is led by Iron Claw, a man who cosplays as a thundercloud and clearly takes cues from Dr. Claw from Inspector Gadget regarding hand prosthetics. He utilizes a large network of crime bosses and employs mechanical monsters to do his bidding. Right from the start of the series, it's clear that the writers were trying for a very different kind of show with JAKQ to differentiate it from Goranger. While Goranger has a fantastical sci-fi plot about alien invaders, JAKQ is a more down-to-earth police procedural drama, focusing on an international crime syndicate. The aesthetics of the show, from the filming to the music, are all reminiscent of police procedurals of the era. The stories are darker and more realistic, with civilians, police officers, even children dying at the hands of crime. JAKQ also uses their arsenal in a more proactive method than Goranger. The Gorangers use their airship for rescue missions. Meanwhile, JAKQ's airship, the Sky Ace, has many weapons that the team is not afraid of using. This establishes that the show isn't gun-shy about its subject matter. In the very first episode, we have police officers being shot down and one of the main characters almost being assassinated. It doesn't get any happier from there. While the Gorangers would always stop their enemies and come out smelling like a rose, JAKQ drills into us the understanding that our heroes, although cybernetically altered to be superhuman cyborgs, are still at their core very much mortal and human. In one early episode, one of JAKQ's agents is blackmailed by the enemy for intel. This is something that happens to the Gorangers as well, and the Gorangers are able to find a way to save everyone and defeat their enemies. In JAKQ's case though, the team ends up saving the day, but the agent is assassinated by crime despite Goro's efforts to save her. In another episode, Bunta meets a little girl who reminds him of his younger sister, but she and her parents are killed when the plane they're in is blown up by crime. Part of what makes these stories compelling is that JAKQ is a true ensemble cast. While Goro is the leader, he's not given special treatment or focus, and each member of the team has something to offer. They each have their unique abilities, unique weapons, and each of them also has a unique vehicle, compared to last season where only 3 of the Gorangers had their own bikes, with the other 2 having to ride in sidecars. Every episode lets us see a different side of each member of the team, in relation to their role in the ongoing conflict with crime, in relation to their teammates, or in relation to civilians who become wrapped up in crime's machinations. The writers also go to great lengths to establish that they're not just colleagues, they're also friends, and you can see the thought put into the writing to establish a team dynamic that was compelling and believable. The show also goes out of its way to ensure that the characters' abilities and powers have clear drawbacks and limitations. While it's true that their costume forms are more powerful, they're less conducive to investigations, so the team spends equal time in and out of their costumes. When they need to investigate without drawing attention, they go out in their civilian clothes. When they have to fight their enemies, they have to get into special capsules that transform them into their JAKQ costumes. A good amount of the drama from the first half of the series is focused on the characters getting into trouble while investigating, being outgunned by a stronger enemy, and trying to figure out a method of getting to their capsules, either through their wits or through teamwork, so that they can access their more powerful forms. This placed a necessary limitation on their powers and made for good writing, because the characters had to be cunning and smart rather than just rely on their powers to solve all their problems. And then he shows up. Sokichi Banba is Big One. He's a dandy playboy with a flair for the dramatic. He takes over for Joker a little over halfway through the show and becomes the acting captain of JAKQ, immediately usurping the show. He's a cyborg like the other 4 JAKQ members, except he can control all 4 fundamental forces. He's a brilliant tactician, and he wields the big baton, which is probably the strongest weapon that any individual JAKQ member has. He takes over the leadership role from Goro, is a one-man army, and his introduction causes the rest of the team to become supporting characters in their own show. They make a show about not trusting him at first, but that lasts all of 5 minutes before he's accepted as the new leader. In other words, Big One is simultaneously the worst and the best thing about JAKQ. It's kind of hard to review JAKQ. Part of this is due to the fact that JAKQ is actually 2 shows. We have the first 22 episodes, which I call JAKQ, and the last 13 episodes, which I call the Big One show. The first part is a police procedural that is well written and engaging, despite some whimsical elements, while the second part is where JAKQ's major contributions to Super Sentai are found. That's not to say that the second part of the show is bad per se, but JAKQ starts as a crime investigation show and then does a hard right into Saturday morning cartoon territory. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with Saturday morning cartoons, but the issue here is consistency. After Big One shows up, the show all but drops its police procedural storyline and goes with an "it was aliens all along" angle, after which the plot falls apart faster than a celebrity marriage. The first part of JAKQ was compelling and interesting because their enemies were human. By removing that storyline, they removed the element that set JAKQ apart from Goranger. So the second part of JAKQ is more a pale imitation of Goranger than a continuation of JAKQ itself. In order to make Big One seem like the coolest character in the show, they made the other 4 JAKQ members much less competent. Every episode after Big One's introduction is some variation of the JAKQ team engages the alien threat, gets overwhelmed, and has to be bailed out by Big One, whose plans aren't so much brilliant as they are crazy, which leads to bizarre scenarios like having to rescue the team from a Nazi alligator by dressing up as Hitler.
Guten Tag, es Ihnen. Danke sehr gut.
That's it's a bit it's kind of. Let's move on. The writers try to give the other team members things to do after Big One is introduced, such as developing a romance between Goro and Karen near the end of the series. But most of the episodes just have the JAKQ members fall into traps that Big One has to save them from. It doesn't help that Big One mostly plays by his own rules and will be doing his own thing while the other members are out investigating cases. And while this is supposed to build up mystique, all it really does is make him look like a bit of an inconsistent and irresponsible leader. What's even worse is that Big One's arrival is accompanied by the introduction of another character who is far less welcome in a show like JAKQ. Meet Tamasaburo Hime, a ramen cook who's transferred to the JAKQ base to assist them. He's dim-witted and clumsy, and he gets in the way more often than not. He's a blatant comedic relief character whose sole purpose is to lighten up the show. By now you're asking, but why? Well, apparently the darker tone and more realistic shift in storytelling did not sit well with JAKQ's target audience, which was children. I call this the Sentai is for kids syndrome, and it rears its head multiple times in the franchise. The writers tried to mitigate this by doing things like introducing a cute hamster character that would get into fights with Bunta, and making more episodes featuring child characters. But 22 episodes in, it wasn't looking good. So the executives told the writers, you will lighten up the show, you will make it appeal to kids more, or we will pull the plug, thus necessitating the presence of Big One and Tamasuboro in the show's later half. Unfortunately, this ended up doing little to delay the show's cancellation. People who enjoyed the first half of the season were blindsided by the sudden shift in tone, and the people who tuned out early didn't bother coming back. So 13 episodes after Big One shows up, Ironclaw transforms into Destro from G.I. Joe, and both he and his robot alien boss, Shine, are unceremoniously blown up in an anticlimactic battle, ending the season's run at a mere 35 episodes, concluding JAKQ the same year it debuted. JAKQ's costumes are excellent in my opinion. When I first saw them as a kid, I thought they looked really stupid. But as I've grown, I've learned to appreciate the little touches and upgrades to the design sensibilities from Goranger. To forward the idea that JAKQ is an ensemble cast, all of the original team members have very similar costumes, with small touches that differentiate them from each other. Spade Ace's helmet color scheme is a bit different from the others, but that's really the only thing different about his costume. Big One has a very simplistic costume, but it very much gets across what his character is like. The 4 colors of the original team members coming together to create a white light. The music is really reminiscent of the era's police procedural shows. It can't be understated how much it adds to the aesthetic of JAKQ. Before Pat Ranger and Deca Ranger, you had JAKQ, and it being the first real example of a police-themed Sentai show doesn't really get enough recognition. The effects are a bit hit or miss. They're certainly better than Go Rangers, but in an attempt to try and hide the fact that the effects aren't the best, the showrunners utilize a lot of quick cuts and edits that only really serve to disorient and bring attention to the poor effects rather than hide them. What effects are still present are passable at the best of times, and at the worst of times, oh good, now I have epilepsy. So, is JAKQ worth a watch? I'd say so, yes. It's only 35 episodes, and it's worth a watch because it may not have been the most popular show in its time, but it made some important contributions to the overall series. Today, JAKQ has been vindicated by history, the first half being seen as a bold take on a Sentai season, and the second half being the part that has Big One, who has gone on to become one of the series' mascots along with Akarenja. The season also made major contributions to the Sentai formula. Big One, while being the 5th team member, is the very first example of a 6th Ranger. Before Dragon Ranger, before even X1 Mask, Big One was the original 6th Ranger. The season also provides the first instance of a Sentai team-up, with the post-season movie JAKQ vs. Goranger, seeing the 2 teams joining forces to defeat a revived Iron Claw and his new team of crime bosses. 19 years before Sentai team-ups became a regular occurrence, and establishing a shared universe between the Kamen Rider and Super Sentai shows, 35 years before the existence of Superhero Taisen. The movie ends with crime destroyed, but also the realization that JAKQ and Goranger will always fight on to maintain peace, and the Sentai series comes to an end. Except, that's not the whole story, is it? Sure, the Sentai series came to an end, and it was probably going to stay that way. Super Sentai, on the other hand? Now that's a whole new story. You could say it was a marvel. Join me next time, and we'll take a look at Battle Fever J. So what did you think about JAKQ Dengekitai? Have you watched it? And if you have, what are your thoughts on it? Be sure to leave a comment with your thoughts on the season. And again, if you enjoy what I'm doing here, hit that like button. If you're a new viewer, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And if you think I deserve it, go ahead and share this video with your friends. If you want to follow me on social media, check the description below. I left my handles in them. The Super Sentai Overview is a production by the fans for the fans. We appreciate any and all support that our fans can give us. As always, I'll see you next time. Abayo!